Hello, we are back with the Center for European Research and the NEXTEUK project of the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence on the future of EU-UK relations. I'm Dr. Sarah Wolf, Director of the Center, and I'm really pleased today to welcome to this virtual seminar series on European integration, the future of EU-UK relations in times of COVID-19, Ruben Zaiotti. He's also director of the Jean Monnet European Union Center of Excellence in Dalhousie University in Canada, and he's Jean Monnet Chair in Public Diplomacy. Hello.
Hello. Hi, Sarah. How are you? Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. So I think we've come to know each other through our respective works on migration and border management, and you are well known for having dealt with Schengenization. You have written, I think, quite, at least in our small circle of experts, an interesting blog called Schengenalia, and I discovered as well that you were the curator of the Schengen Border Art website, which is really interesting about learning about creative performances on European borders. And you have written, I think, 2 major books on the topic. The first one was on culture of border controls on Schengen and the evolution of European frontiers, with University of Chicago Press, and another book that you have edited is Externalizing Migration Management, and where you were comparing Europe, North America, and the spread of so-called remote control practices. So thank you for being here, and maybe you want to add something to that short introduction.
No, I just want to mention the fact that apart from my ongoing work on Schengen, I've been trying to look at other aspects related to the study of the Union and migration. One of the projects I'm currently working on, I'm just wrapping it up, it's about the perceptions of the EU from outside Europe, of the EU itself, through different lenses, but one of which would be migration. So I worked on a project on trying to figure out what people, social media in particular as a platform, think about the EU, and when it comes to the management of the migration issue, in particular with regard to the migration crisis, the ongoing migration crisis. So that's a project I've been working on as part of a larger project on the perception of international organizations, including the EU, on social media.
Okay, I will come back to that, because of course I think what I wanted to talk about with you today is the impact of COVID-19 on Schengen, but also on migration and border management. So I will come back to this also issue of perception, and how the EU is being perceived or will be perceived more generally, also from the impact that COVID-19 will have on migration. And maybe a first impression on how do you think so far, how do you evaluate the EU response to COVID-19, and especially the impact it had on Schengen? So I think
so definitely COVID-19 and the pandemic has had a very relevant, great impact on Europe, as we know, and around the world, but also, in particular, with regard to the issue of borders. I mean, at the end of the day, the primary response that European countries, but also sub-regional entities, subnational entities, even cities have done, is to restrict mobility. And when we think about restricting mobility, what it means in practice is that people are prevented from moving across borders of different kinds. Schengen is about mainly national borders, the borders of Europe, European countries. But the impact of COVID-19 has not been felt only on national borders, but also on subnational borders. The example of Italy, one of the originally from, it's a good one because restrictions now are in place so that citizens, Italian citizens, whoever has the right to be in the country, is prevented from traveling from, in some cases, from town to town, to region. So the restrictions, so the impact on COVID-19 on the issue of borders in Europe has been huge and certainly unprecedented. So in a sense, it is about Schengen, but it's not just about Schengen. I guess I'll come back to that when we talk about the future of the Schengen regime, because that, to me, it's quite interesting that the connection between the two elements.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I mean, I'm French, and I can see already that people need authorization, to go beyond the 1 kilometer around their homes, actually, to move. So from what I gather and what you just said is that possibly also the measures that have been adopted in different ways, I think, across Europe, could it have an impact on human rights, on rights of European citizens as well?
Certainly. Again, this is, I keep repeating it, but I'm pretty sure most people would say that this is unprecedented. The fact that borders among European countries are members of the Schengen regime, for those of you who are familiar, the Schengen regime it's a political arrangement that allows individuals and goods and as well to travel across Europe. Countries are members of this regime without needing to show in the passport. So the idea is that people are free to move across countries. There are exceptions, though, to that rule, even within Schengen. So in exceptional circumstances, it's possible to reinstate those border controls. Now, when we move to the national level, the reposition because the original idea is that one of the rights attached to being a citizen is the ability to move freely within the country. This right has been restricted, and it is being done in a way that is considered to be legal, although there are some issues around that. There are some rules that allow governments, the national level or local level, to impose some restrictions, but these restrictions haven't been seen, certainly not in Europe, for a long time. We're talking about probably during wartime. So for the majority of us, of Europeans, this is something new that's never happened before. European citizens have taken for granted the right to move freely within their own country. So the fact that now this is not the case, albeit temporarily, we think it is, at least it is presented as a temporary measure, it's something that's changed the way we think about borders for sure. As I said, it's not just about national borders. We're not free to travel between, say, France and Italy like we used to be a few months ago. But now we're not even free to travel from, say, Milan to Rome. So this is clearly has changed the way we perceive borders in Europe.
And I think it has, as you were saying, to do also with our mentalities and imagination as well of how we see borders. You were just making that point. And do you think that, traditionally until now, the EU has been, and maybe you can tell us also about, the transatlantic perspective, how it's being perceived from Canada, but how that the EU has been perceived as maybe lacking coordination in taking all these different measures, including on Schengen. I think the Commission has made a proposal on temporary restrictions on non-essential travel to the EU that was adopted by member states, but most of the reintroduction of internal border controls have been taken in very different ways by EU member states.
Yes, and the timing as well. There's these measures be taken out at the same time in different time frames. So the context of that is that individual members of the Schengen regime have they have the ability to impose temporary border controls if they provide a good rationale, reason, valid reasons. Some are events that can be foreseen in advance. Like, for example, there's a big sport event that has happened in the past. So individual countries have imposed border controls to ensure that public safety is under control. More recently, before the COVID-19 issue came up, some member states, members of the Schengen regime, have imposed temporary border control, internal border controls, because of the ongoing migration crisis. So this is not unprecedented that member states, Schengen member states, impose their controls over movement across borders. Typically, though, these member states have to tell the European Commission about it, and then they have to explain why they're doing it, and the Commission has the ability to give an opinion on whether it's justified or not. Now, so that should give some kind of sense of coordination that should happen within the system. We already noticed, though, in the previous scenario that I described in the context of the migration crisis, that this coordination did not really work as planned, in a sense that individual member states went their own way. They did inform the Commission, but sometimes after the fact, the justification they provided not really very strong, and the timeline they have vision was much longer than probably the situation itself would have warranted. And these kind of dynamics have been repeated in the case of the COVID-19 crisis. And in a sense, it is understandable, because this is a crisis that happened very quickly, relatively quickly, and individual countries wanted to respond quickly. But from a sort of institutional perspective, you look at the Schengen regime as an institution, the fact that individual member states have gone their own way has created some tensions among member states, and also has put the European Commission in a sort of awkward situation, because it had to deal with de facto, situation without having much control. And you see, if you look at the list of countries that reimpose border controls, mind you, some of them that had already been in place because of the migration crisis. So it's sort of reinforced the idea that border controls had been taken, but they were already in place. But if you look at the list, there are countries, from Austria to Sweden, and they also took those steps at different times, different dates. And I think the European Commission, as you mentioned, decided to give the indication that, to suggest that travel from outside the EU should be suspended as well, as a way to take the initiative again, providing a sort of a common framework within which each member state could at least find itself. And in fact, after the European Commission came up with a proposal, the ones that had not yet imposed border controls, they haven't done it. So back to your question about coordination, there has been some coordination, but limited, and it raises a lot of questions about whether this is going to be sustainable in the long run.
So would you agree that compared to the reintroduction of internal border controls that had already happened, as you said, since the 2015 so-called migration crisis, that there is a sort, and even though it's unprecedented, that there is a sort of continuity in the way member states behaves in renationalization of internal border controls? Is Schengen in danger, or are you still positive about the future?
So, I've written about that in the past, the fact that Schengen has been in crisis for a long time, or at least it's been considered to be in crisis, under danger. The story of the death of Schengen has been, already many times. But certainly, again, I mean, I tend to be on the optimistic side. I've been in the past about the fact that, there are ways, the Schengen is quite flexible as an arrangement that allows for these sort of exceptions, as long as there is the underlying political commitment to keep it running. Nowadays, COVID-19 certainly has put another heavy stress on the system. I would say, though, at the moment, the system is frozen. To me, it's not dead, but it's certainly frozen. It's because of the sheer number of countries that now have imposed border controls. It's acted, it's not active. But I see a silver lining there, because I think if the premise for the revival of Schengen is that there has to be some kind of political commitment and popular support. I mentioned that, but this is important too. European citizens need to have some kind of support, to be behind the system to get it back on its feet. The fact that nowadays COVID-19 has created a kind of context that is perceived by European citizen politicians as exceptional. That means that maybe if things get to some level of normalcy, then Schengen might be able to be revived. And in fact, I can see Schengen as a way to help this transition. Because the reopening borders, a lot of people now, open borders could be seen as a good thing, if compared with the situation nowadays. If people are feeling more and more now that they don't want to be stuck at home, they want to travel to see their parents, their relatives, in another town, another city, that could transfer into also wanting to have borders open between European countries as well. So that's, as I said, a silver lining in all the current situation.
So that's an argument against populism, and populists who argue that we should be, more about protection and staying inside. And I think the issue,
yes, but the thing is, if you look at the argument of populists, there is a level of contradiction here. If you look at the most populist parties and politicians, who support these movements, are not necessarily in favor of restrictions, individual restrictions. People look on Europe, certainly that's the case in the United States. But even in the rhetoric of some populist leaders in Europe, you see that there is increased criticism against governments, those populist parties are not in power, against those restrictions. So it's a fine line to say, yes, we should lift the restrictions, but not at the national level. You can see why they would say that. They say, well, there's a threat to somebody else coming from outside the country, in fact, start again the process. But it's a fine line. It's an opening here, closing there, west. Yeah. What I'm saying is that there's ambiguity there, can be exploited from both sides, either to support the reopening of national, Schengen borders, or to close them.
Yeah. This brings me to another question on the impact on migration, or how also migrants might be perceived, within and after this COVID-19. We have seen, at least within intra-regional European migration, that a lot of countries, I am now in the Netherlands, nobody is available to harvest, strawberries and asperges. So in a way, there is this argument that maybe people are realizing how migrants are, useful to their economies. But on the other hand, we have seen also a lot of racist and discriminatory practices vis-a-vis migrants. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is like everything else, it's a very complex issue, because, well, on one level, it's about the distinction between regular migration, that's, some even populist parties, anti-immigration parties, tend to at least try at the official level to distinguish between the two. They say, well, we're not necessarily against migrants per se, we're against those who break the rules and so on. Again, a fine line that in practice often is not translated into humane or treatment of migrants, both at the rhetorical level, but also the practical. But you see that, for example, there's already a movement towards allowing some migrants, legal migrants, to come to Europe, and countries that are technically still part of Europe, but the UK, for example, but also in Italy. Recently, there's been some regulations that have allowed some migrants to come and temporary migrants to pick up, harvest, and so help the agricultural sector. So there could be, a sense that those migrants are needed, and so there should be more. So borders should be more open. But that, to me, goes against other dynamics, other forces that were present before. They're not going to go away. They say that migrants should not be there in the first place. So COVID-19 has given another reason why we shouldn't be there. And see no further than what's happening with regards to those migrants are coming from individuals coming from North Africa, both in Southern Europe. Nowadays the ability to reach the European shores are even more limited than they were before, because the Italian government, for example, does not allow these boats to track into Italian ports. So again, it could go both ways, but COVID-19 has, in a sense, has highlighted, emphasized trends that were already present in previous years. Just to conclude, the issue about agricultural sector and those who are working there was important before as well, whether migrants were needed or not in that sector. Those who own those factories, who rely on that labor, favor having more migrants, but the rest of the population was not.
Yeah.
This is not going to change.
And not even thinking about the situation in the hotspots in Greece and with people who are also at risk with COVID-19 and with very dire conditions. Yeah.
Just if I can add one point about the other aspect of the process, which is the refugee system. All these trends that we've been discussing, the closing of subnational, national, international, in case of Europe as a whole, but this also applies to other contexts outside Europe, North America in particular, has meant that access to asylum, which was already very limited, is almost impossible now. Even in cases in which the process was quite advanced. Think about resettlement. So some of those individuals who had already been selected to be resettled from a refugee camp or another country to a country of asylum, now everything is frozen, so they can't go. Those who are the top of the queue, if I call it that way, are stuck.
And how is it in Canada? So, from a North American perspective, where you have heard that your neighbor is suspending any immigration, and you have also views on Europe. What is the perception on all of this?
Well, the thing is, the other point that is important to understand, to make sense of what's happening in Europe, is that this is not just a European issue, as most people are aware of, and some of the dynamics that are happening in Europe are produced, heightened elsewhere. This is the case in North America. Borders are being shut down as well, not as strictly internally, at least, as is the case in Europe, but certainly international borders, both the border between Canada and the US, the external border of the US and Canada. It's very difficult now to travel in and out of the two countries. So I think that the lesson of COVID-19 is that the local experiences are very similar across the world. And I think that allows to understand each other better. And that's, again, if you can call it that way, a positive impact of the crisis, that we're facing similar situations and the responses might be slightly different, but we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that it's useful to keep in mind. And I think whether one of the two sides, the North America and Europe, are moving in a particular direction or another, meaning reopening borders or not, is going to be influenced, at least in part, by what the others are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you mentioned at the beginning your project on social media. Yeah. So you were looking at identity, I think, and the making of European Union's global reputation as well. Yeah. Do you have any first thoughts about how this is being handled at the moment from a social media point of view?
Yeah. So my project was mostly based on the original, if I call it that way, crisis, meaning the height of the crisis in 2015, 16. So I was trying to track that and try to see whether there was some reverberations today. But I guess the interesting aspect of finding of that project is that it showed that, I mean, there are of course some limitations in terms of how you can figure out what that reputation is, how to measure it. I'm not going to go into the details here, but the fact is, the opinion, so the opinion of the public, so what I was looking at was not, first of all, just a qualification, the opinion of individual users on social media and Twitter in particular, of the use handling of the migration crisis. So I was not looking at news media, official accounts of organizations or even NGOs, just private individuals. So popular opinion, if you call it that way, globally. I was looking at both North America, Latin America, Asia, Africa, with some limitation to the number of material available. Anyway, what I found, and again, a lot of caveats, is that in reality, the reputation of the EU is not being tarnished that much. Keep in mind that probably wasn't up that high before the crisis. But we have to also keep in mind that outside Europe, the EU is not very well known. That's, as Europeans, we take it for granted. Everyone knows about what it is, but that's not the case. So, and I think the crisis has helped, put it away, putting the EU on the map. Okay, and one can argue, well, yes, but it's not necessarily what the EU wanted. I mean, this is a crisis, and for many people, this is not a good example of how the EU is supposed to work. Which, for sure, that's the case. To me, the fact that the majority of people were not necessarily concerned or had strong feelings against the EU as an institution, and were more concerned about the crisis itself. So to me, what we can get out of that is the EU at least got out of that greater recognition, so a better reputation, or at least not as bad reputation from it as some commentators, including within the European Union, thought during the height of the crisis.
Okay, that's an interesting finding about the visibility of the EU, and indeed, not necessarily being so important from Asia or from Latin America compared to other countries geopolitically as well. Huh? And
but you put the other thing I should add is that when we talk about reputation is not just about positive views. Yeah. You can have a bad reputation, a strong one. Yeah. It can be still strong, your reputation, although it's not necessarily a good one. But in the world of world politics, sometimes not being a good guy, good person, it's not necessarily what you need. Sometimes you need to be, to be seen as the nice person, but do, make a difference. In that sense, it might have helped a little bit. Again, it's just one aspect. We're talking just a migration issue, not as a whole.
So maybe to wrap up, I mean, you have really highlighted how, what is happening and the impact of COVID-19 on Schengen is actually reflecting more longer trends that were already there when it comes to introducing internal border controls in the behavior of member states. That it is unprecedented, and you're still hopeful, I think, for the future when it comes to freedom of movement, and that it's, I think you mentioned also, it's about trust, popular trust and legitimacy, and I think the European Commission is quite aware of that as well, in sort of, I hope, coordinating a little bit maybe the relaxing COVID-19 measures as well. So what are your thoughts in general, just to conclude, any additional thoughts on the future of European integration, after the migration crisis, after COVID-19? What will come out? Do you have what kind of trends do you foresee?
Yeah, since the topic of today is, the COVID-19 through the lenses of borders and migration, so I'm going to look at it from that perspective. I think that if Schengen was created as a way to, it's been described, and I talked about it in my work, as a laboratory of the EU, so a way to think about how the EU might look like as an experiment, and then showing some results, and from then being able to move forward in the process of European integration, then maybe the Schengen regime can play that role again. I hinted at how that looked like minutes ago. The idea would be that if the response, the core of the response to the COVID-19 has been the shutting down of borders, the border of the city, of the region, and so on. The next step, it's about reopening European societies from the bottom up, literally, from your house to the rest of the continent. So Schengen might lead the way if reopening those borders shows that that's a way to revitalize not just the European economy, but European societies. At the end of the day, after this crisis is over, if it's going to be, when it's going to be over, I think a lot of people would feel like, I want to get out. I want to get out and move and travel. Again, I don't know whether it's going to be possible. Certainly, people would feel that, like to do it. So Schengen could lead the way. And just to conclude, I think it would be interesting that it could be the role that Schengen would play would be a reversal of what it has played in the past. Because Schengen is a political type of arrangement that was presented as a way to achieve an economic goal, which is what that European integration. The abolition of controls was also presented as a way to increase that economic integration. But now it could be the other way around, because one of the main tasks of the European, not just European Union, but each individual member state, is to get back on its feet from an economic point of view. So Schengen can help that too. I mean, if people travel, if goods are able to move again relatively smoothly across the continent, that might help revitalize the European economy and those of the member states. So Schengen could play that role. So in that sense, it's a political decision that would have economic consequences.
Yeah.
So that's what I see the role that the Schengen regime might play, if, of course, things settle somewhat and things can, the whole scenario gets back to some level of normalcy.
Yeah. And I would like to thank you for your time today, because I know it's not always easy. And I mean, to conclude also and to sum up, I think maybe another way to look at it, and maybe for future research as well, is also to look into the identity dimension of Schengen. And because you were saying, it's about also taking for granted our freedom of movement as Europeans, and now we do realize how how we miss it
Yeah.
So that could be, as you were suggesting, a way to reverse things when thinking about Schengen. Thank you again for this time.
No problem. It's a pleasure. Thank you, and see you soon.
See you.